In this video, we interviewed Denise Scott, president of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, also known as LISC. LISC is one of the nation's largest community development finance institutions, responsible for deploying billions of dollars in funding throughout communities across the country. Prior to stepping into the role of president at LISC, Denise served as the organization's executive vice president for 7 years, overseeing 39 local program offices and 9 national programs. Denise first joined LISC in 2001, serving as executive director of LISC New York City, the organization's largest local program. She also served as the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and she still sits on the board. Denise held leadership positions at the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the New York City Mayor's Office of Housing Coordination. She led numerous community-based housing and economic development initiatives, including serving as the director of the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation and Development's Harlem Neighborhood Preservation Program Office. Denise is a national leader in community development finance and philanthropy, and is also known for her fierce advocacy for social and racial equity. In this video, Denise walks us through key priorities at LISC, including expanding economic opportunity, building climate resilience in communities, and advancing racial equity in the community development sector. So let's jump in. I am so happy to get on your calendar for this meeting. You know, we have a lot of lively discussions about your work all the time. And as you know, we've been pulling together this video series to give voice to important issues around community development, community economic, climate resilience, and affordable housing. I'm excited to have you share your insight on the opportunities for funding and some of the challenges you've been working through. And I know many community leaders and nonprofit leaders out there are interested in hearing about the ways in which your sector, the community development finance institutions, the philanthropic organizations are augmenting their approach to ensure adequate funding and better advocacy for community organizations on the ground. So Denise, thank you so much for joining us. And we're excited about this discussion.
Anasa, first let me say I am really pleased to be here. I am really happy that you've chosen to focus on this really important work and to create the venues for a discussion around inclusive economies and economic development. And I know that you have a special passion for communities of color, and specifically the Black community, and how we benefit from the opportunities. So there's a lot to say in my role at LISC. I've been at LISC now for about 21 years. And over the course of that time, I've held several different positions. I ran the New York City LISC office for about 12 years. And that was, it still remains one of our largest programs across the country. There are now 38 LISC offices. And so my job as president entails providing the oversight across the suite of LISC programs, both in terms of our local offices across the country, as well as our national programs, including everything from housing and economic development and community safety, a number of talent development programs, including AmeriCorps, and a host of other programs, workforce development, charter schools. There's a whole range of programs. We see our work through a comprehensive community development lens. Our work is by design comprehensive because there's no one program that solves the problems that are necessary or addresses the issues that our families and our businesses face. So by design, we link together the many facets of work that's necessary in order to help improve our communities. Today, we are working under the banner of what we call Project 10X. It's an initiative to fundamentally change the economic condition of people living in poverty, of communities of color, um, specifically Black and Brown communities, to make sure that the opportunity gaps and the wealth gap, the racial gap, the health gaps, all the gaps are addressed through the programmatic work that we do. This is important. It's for us, the focus today across community development and philanthropy in government and many places where the focus is on really improving communities of color. We see the work as it's not superficial. We have to address the systemic and structural changes that are necessary in order to really get at making this fundamental change to improve the lives of community. It has been, our communities have gone through in the last several years many pandemics. COVID was just one. As the economy and the instability in the economy has created for folks who were already behind the 8 ball, who were already at the lowest ends of the income spectrum, for families who have not been able to amass any type of wealth. There's no savings, there's no asset as in housing, limited capacity at all, or if at all, to start a business. So for many families, the prospects of diminishing the gap between, say, white and Black wealth is an impossible feat. If people have not rebounded from 2008 and were exacerbated by the impact of COVID in terms of health outcomes, the probability is low that in this current economic environment, that families are going to be able to fare well without some significant intervention. So our work is really designed to address the issues that our communities face. To address it with intentionality, we have to become unapologetic in our decision-making process and think about the fact that there are many communities, even in the community development sector, we have a responsibility to rethink the way we do business, to reconsider how we get, who we partner with, how resources are deployed. And historically, we must admit that we were not given even not-for-profit resources in an equitable way to communities of color. And so now that we are owning up to that and we are prepared to do something about it, that also includes building the capacity of community organizations that were left out, building their capacity to participate in the rebuilding, in the closing of the opportunity and the race gap. As we look across the country, we look at community-based organizations, for example, and we consider them to be the essential workers because they were on the front line. Many of us in the community development world, especially at the intermediary level, at like a LISC and organizations like LISC, we had the luxury to pull our people in, to allow them to work from home, to connect them to the technology tools that they needed, so that they could do their work, and we could continue on with the work that we had to do. And we did a lot of work. Hundreds of millions of dollars were deployed. Money was deployed, and our people had the capacity, because of LISC, had the ability, the opportunity to work from home. But many organizations could not keep their people home because, as the frontline workers, as what we want to call the essential workers, those folks, they had to be in the buildings to support the tenants, to feed children, to make sure the seniors had services and that food was delivered. Pantries grew exponentially during the pandemic. And these are all what the frontline workers did. As a result, many of them were exposed to higher rates of COVID because they were on the front line, facing the public every day. So I think it's a story that hasn't really fully been told about just how essential these people were. While the communities that we care most about, that LISC is focused on, while those communities suffered disproportionately, we are certain that the suffering would have been significantly higher had it not been for many of the not-for-profits who kept their doors open and who were willing to work under fairly extraordinary circumstances. So it's a big deal. I think where this all leads us today is to understand that there's a lot of difficult times ahead of us on the economic front, but in an interesting moment in time, we have perhaps more money to support community development efforts and families with limited incomes than we've had in many, many, many decades, if ever. Billions of dollars have been deployed to support the work, to really support, to assist communities, to help develop their move to sustainability and to help push for a more inclusive economy. However, there are many challenges with getting this money where it belongs, because while it's billions of dollars for many local governments, it's also more money than they've ever had to deploy. And their capacity to deploy these dollars is limited. So as long as that part of the delivery system is not fixed, you'll have this situation where there's billions of dollars, that's the opportunity that could meet the problem, but a system that's not set up to deploy the funding. So that's another big area that we're working on, working with a number of local governments to try and build their capacity to partner with them to get resources to the ground and make sure that the families that these funds were intended for are actually going to receive them.
How do you bring all of these stakeholders together and kind of keep them in the game long term and work towards one shared agenda for the duration of a project?
What you have described is exactly what LISC does. LISC has been around for 40 years. We've been doing the convening the various stakeholders across our communities for all of those 40 years. Today, the more intentionality around it is to make sure that the convening is more inclusive of a broader range of community, to make sure that we're really clear about kind of redefining our agenda around a more inclusive economy. So we're not just coming together to talk about what we each do, but rather to figure out how we rationalize the service delivery system, because a reordering is necessary. So some of this is organizing regional and local players to work together. Together, they can develop a more laser-focused agenda on the idea of building, for example, wealth in BIPOC communities. The community development organizations and the regional economic development agencies, they don't necessarily know each other well. And so while we have had a historical role in convening, I think some of the new convening will include the more economic development sector, because it's really a honing in disparities, the racial disparities that lead to economic disparities and vice versa. So even though there are a lot of organizations and the work is state by state, city by city, sometimes block by block, that's part of what makes it so difficult. This is the work. And so a commitment to organizing the various sectors around common agendas, that is what we do. This is not for the faint of heart. It's not superficial. It has intentionality, and it requires us to try and bring down the walls that may separate us, to push us through this more common agenda. So it's really important that we find ways to deepen understanding among ourselves and other players at the table. But most important out of all of the convening activity is the voice of community. And so our convenings have to make sure that they are addressing that voice, that we are, our job, our work is really to elevate the voice, the vision that community has, and to provide community, to empower community to be able to realize their goal. So it's not, it is a, I don't think I could say there's a science per se, but what it is it's really, it is community organizing at its core. And it requires a commitment to working through the differences to get to a common cause. It requires some new thinking on behalf of LISC and our funding partners. So it's not business as usual. But like I said, it's work that we've been doing over the years, that convening part. We have an understanding of how to bring partners together, but today's work is to make sure that the convening at the table, we have brought together a far more diverse group of people, both in terms of diverse in terms of race, but then also programmatically.
It sounds like in every situation, these issues are challenging because you're entering a distressed community. People are frustrated. There's a lot of blight. So can you talk through a situation where you were able to go in and kind of overcome those challenges, and you have a few models that kind of give us hope, or somewhat of a model of how to navigate these issues?
One example that I'm really proud of is like that during the pandemic, there was, I mean, this wasn't something that we prepared for. It just, right, it's upon us, and we have to shut down the economy. And there's so many businesses that were fragile before the shutdown. We were especially concerned about small businesses, Black-owned, women-owned businesses that were providing significant services to communities that, but for these local businesses, many of the types of services would not have existed, or people had to pay significantly more or go to other neighborhoods to secure basic services even. We call it P3, the Paycheck Protection Program. When it became available, we thought, wow, this is great. Wouldn't it be great if somehow LISC could get involved and try to help businesses that we knew would never be able to get through the Paycheck Protection Program, because it required a far more organized infrastructure than many of the businesses had. And so without assistance, they probably would not have been able to secure funding to preserve their businesses. So we went in, deep in, trying to find ways. And even for LISC, it was a challenge to find the resources that were necessary in order to participate in the program. There was no direct access for even a LISC. You had to be a bank. And so we didn't have access to the funding. Luckily, we found a partner in a foundation, a family foundation, that decided that our cause was worthy. And with substantial resources from us, almost $300 million, they got us in the game. And with that, we opened a door for many small businesses. The significant majority of the businesses that we served were minority-owned businesses. Many of them were women-owned businesses, and many of the women-owned businesses were also minority women. That's a big deal. But for LISC's role in figuring out a way to amass the resources to participate in the program, these businesses would never have gotten a dime from that program. The distance between many federal resources and the people it's intended to serve can be very far because the hurdles are significant to try and figure out how to meet the compliance requirements in order to secure a successful award. But that was something that we did. And I think that history will credit us for our intentionality around finding a solution, finding one, taking a risk to make sure that we were able to serve businesses in our community. And we understood how important, because we understood how important these businesses were. And the fact that it's a job, these are jobs that we were also protecting. Another example is daycare. We've always understood back 40 years that daycare was fragile. For women, especially women with limited incomes, women and families of color, very fragile. But it created where it was available, a pathway for women to actually participate in the workplace. The daycare system, that fragile daycare system, completely fell on its head during COVID. 2 years of that shutdown. And today, where we are is focused on how do we help to, it's not rebuild daycare because it was never good, but how do we create a daycare system that is responding to the needs of families and women in the workplace? But for that focus and some remedies around creating new daycare models, some of it may be upgrading the existing spaces to be more responding to the spacing requirements and that sort of thing, or just upgrading the total quality of the work of the spaces, and figuring out how to create better business models for the people who are hosting daycare. So over the coming, I would say, years, we will be very focused on figuring out a way, significant change in how daycare is delivered in the communities that we work in. Another area on this, part of our work, like I said, we're in 38 states, so and working on our 40th. But with our rural work, it takes us into 49 states, so pretty much the entire country. And what we discovered in rural communities, but also was true in many of the urban communities, is that technology was not adequate. The story has yet to be told how many school hours and learning setbacks were experienced by the children that we work with. We may never know as a society, like the damage that was done to the potential leadership of the future and to make contributions to this society. We will never know how much the dearth of technology impacted the last 2 years of learning. And so that's another area that we're focused on is technology. I know you're going to ask me a question because I happen to know a little bit about what you're interested in about ESG and how we're focused there. So I'll just jump into it. It is a comprehensive lens to consider the impact of climate change, but also to consider the socioeconomic impact of everything that's happened, the pandemic and now inflation and a host of 2008 market crash. All of that is a part of how is the lens through which we see ourselves. But what we realize is that, and we're very focused on green and climate resiliency, because many of the people that live in the communities that we're focused in are living in harm's way of the next natural disaster or even man-made disasters, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes, that people are living in places or under conditions that are laced with toxic materials, whether it's lead or asbestos. So we are really upping our game and our focus around making sure that we can create more green, more safe and healthy, and more resilient communities. And some of that means really challenging the status quo in terms of how housing is built, where it's built, how it's built, what materials are used, and really pushing for a much stronger focus around a healthy environment for the families that we're working with. LISC will create in the next year. I'm not sure exactly what the name will be, but let's call it a green center, for lack of another name. That would be a dedicated department to this work that is, we think, critical for the future of the next generations of people, and obviously people today, but certainly that there's something we can do. There's a lot of talk about green and healthy communities and resilient communities. And the question is, will it be an equitable focus? And that's what I think our agenda will have to push ourselves and push a policy agenda around a more equitable ESG agenda. Pretty much every major corporation has an ESG agenda. The question is, does it get us to a more equitable set of outcomes?
I'd like to ask our interviewees to share any call to action. Like, what do you want nonprofit leaders, policymakers, like, what is your parting message for anyone that might be listening?
I mean, I started out by saying that I think it's important that we understand that there is some superficiality, or it's superficial, some of the expression of interest, or even expression of commitment to a more inclusive, a more equitable society. I think that we have to be intentional about our expectations of change, that it is not, so that's going to be particularly important. I think that philanthropy and the CDFI community that LISC is a part of, that we have to begin to think about that our work has to be different. Who we fund, how we fund them, what kind of support we provide, it matters. And so more resources are important, but what's also important is that we're helping to build a capacity for greater participation of parts of the community that even in the community development industry were left out. And so it's a call to action for CDFIs and for philanthropy to step up our game in support of building the leadership of community developers across the country. It means that we have to think about our work in a very sustainable and systemic way. That we're looking for models and best practices that are going to be game changing. Some of what I think we're going to need also is for folks at the grassroots level, folks on the ground, to also be open to a new way of doing business. That some of the practices historically were not best practices, did not lead to great outcomes. And we want to be able to acknowledge that and move on from there. And so there's probably an opportunity to do more cross-sector supporting and working together in partnerships. Can we share the capacity that was built in places where the capacity does not exist? And can we do it under circumstances where, even when there's not capacity, we respect the leadership? Are we willing to do all of that? So it's a both and. It's back to that convening of putting ourselves at the table, understanding that perhaps the most important aspect of this is that elevation and that empowerment of community voice, and kind of the people who are most impacted by the issues that we are trying to address as an industry are the people who should be making the decisions about how these issues are remedied, and supported to do that. So it's not a matter that certain people who were involved once upon a time now have to leave. No, but you have to change the role that you are playing. You might have to move the seat that you're in order to give voice and to give way for a new set of folk who have been excluded, but whose fate is connected to the outcome of the decision making more directly. That these are the people who should have the opportunity to take the lead. So will we see a change in leadership? We're starting to see it. If you look across the country, if you look at philanthropy, you're starting to see it. But there still is a lot of how do we, that convening, it's virtual, it's in person, it has to come from the heart, and it often means that we're having to change our way of thinking and doing business, all of us. So what I would just encourage us to do is, a lot of challenges out there. Like I said, there's a ton of money right now to help fix those challenges. So let's pull ourselves together. Let's take advantage of it. And so I'm excited about the work that you're doing. I know you're talking to a lot of people who do the kind of work that I do, and kind of pulling our voices up in order to kind of make the point that this work is important, and that there are best practices and how we can get our work done. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have this, to share, all of your insight with our audience. And we will see you soon. I hope you will come back and update.
I'd love to be back. I'd love to be able to talk directly to your audience. That sounds like that could be fun.
Oh, sure. Yeah, maybe we can do a panel, something like that.
Yeah. That's great.
Great.
Well,
thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. As Denise shared, the challenges of rebuilding our communities post-pandemic and in this inflationary economy seems really daunting. And let's be real, there's been a lot of loss, and the road to healing and recovery could be quite long, but there's hope. There's so many opportunities out there, so many untapped resources, untapped talent and ideas that we can look towards to begin designing solutions for communities. It sounds like we need to be working more collaboratively, reimagining our roles, fashioning new partnerships, building coalitions to ensure that we have the structures in place to adequately allocate these funds for those solutions, managing those funds effectively so that our communities can receive the resources they need, the programs they need, the infrastructure needed to thrive. So while we focus on healing and recovery, there are loads of possibilities out there, and I'm excited about those possibilities. So I post a lot about it on LinkedIn, on Medium, and Twitter. So you can check me out there for more content. And of course, we'll be bringing you more videos like this. So that's all for now. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.